Well, look, I hope so. We are campaigning hard. I think we have a real fight. We are taking this very seriously. Chuck Schumer's made clear I'm his #1 target in the country, and I fully expect the Democrats to spend between $100 and $150 million in this race trying to beat me. Now, that being said, I do think there's an enormous difference between my record and Colin Allred's record. And I think the people of Texas embrace common sense. My priorities in the Senate have been jobs and freedom and security, and I think the people of Texas want low taxes. We want reasonable regulations. You know, there's a reason 1,000 people a day come to Texas. Texas is where the jobs are, and we got to protect that. We got to keep Texas, Texas. I think Texans also want security. We want our families safe. That means supporting law enforcement. That means securing our border. And we want freedom. We want to protect our basic constitutional liberties. That means religious liberty. That means free speech. That means the Second Amendment. What I've done for 12 years in the Senate every day is fight for 30 million Texans and fight for jobs, for low taxes, for reasonable regulations, for small businesses, fight for your security and fight for your freedoms. And I think that reflects the values of Texans. Congressman Allred's record has been hard left. It does not reflect the values of Texans. And so I think that's what this election is going to come down to. Yeah.
You got
Yeah.
insurance.
Well, listen, the principal driver of inflation is that the federal government has spent trillions of dollars it doesn't have. It's borrowed trillions of dollars it doesn't have. It's printed trillions of dollars it doesn't have. And that happened in massive amounts when the Democrats won the White House and both houses of Congress. And at the time, I and many others say, look, if you do this, we're going to get inflation. And you saw Democrats laughing at us and saying, no, that's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. Well, it happened exactly as we said it would. We've got to rein in spending and rein in the deficits and the debt. And I'll tell you, this problem of inflation has been made particularly bad because the Democrats have waged a war on oil and gas and energy in Texas. And listen, Texas is the world's energy superpower. We just had an energy roundtable here in Dallas. I sat down with energy leaders throughout North Texas. We had a really, really robust conversation. If you look at the average Texas family has paid over $5,100 more in energy costs since Joe Biden became president. That's real money out of working families' budgets. You see it when you pay your electricity bill. You see it when you pay your heating bill. You see it when you fill up your car or your truck with gas. And there's a reason for that. When you have a federal government putting regulatory policies in place that hammer Texas energy producers, it drives costs up. And I got to say, a great example of that is Joe Biden recently halted all new permits to export LNG, to export liquid natural gas. That is a policy that hurts Texas, it hurts America. And I have to say it was stunning because the House of Representatives voted to overturn that policy, and Colin Allred voted with Joe Biden. He voted against the state of Texas, against the interest of energy producers in Texas, against consumers. He voted in favor of higher gas prices, higher heating prices. And that, I think, really reflects a set of policies that don't make any sense. Now, the good news is I think November is going to be a really good election. I think we're going to see Donald Trump reelected. And when that happens, I think we'll also see a Republican Senate and a Republican House. We will see these policies driving inflation and attacking energy production in Texas. We'll see those policies ended. Yes. Well, sure. Listen, I think IVF is incredible medical technology. It has opened the door. It's enabled millions of parents to become parents who couldn't otherwise conceive. And if you look across the country, roughly 2% of all babies born in America are born through IVF. We have over 8 million babies that have been conceived through IVF. And it is extraordinary. It brings life. It lets moms and dads welcome little girls, little boys. And I got to say, you know, the Alabama Supreme Court several months ago had a decision that produced a lot of uncertainty, that produced a lot of fear, that scared a lot of parents into fearing that IVF technology would be taken away, that they would be prevented from being able to access this medical technology to have children. And so I went and I approached Katie Britt, senator from Alabama, a good friend of mine, and she strongly supports IVF. I strongly support IVF. I think it is incredibly important technology. And I said, listen, let's come together. Let's draft simple, straightforward legislation that puts an ironclad guarantee in federal law that IVF will be protected, that every parent in Texas and every other state that wants to access IVF, that you'll be able to access that technology. And so I drafted that legislation with Katie Britt. We introduced it last week. It would put into federal law a guarantee that no state, no local government can ban IVF. And my hope is that we'll see bipartisan agreement, that we'll see Republicans and Democrats come together. I mean, I'll tell you, Jack, out of 100 senators, to the best of my knowledge, all 100 senators support IVF. And if that's right, then we ought to be able to come together and say, let's protect it and let's put it in federal law. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. So look, the Alabama case dealt with a fertility clinic that had been negligent in storing the embryos and had led to the destruction of the embryos. And it was actually the parents who were suing because the clinic had done a bad job. And the Alabama Supreme Court decision said, yes, you can sue, you have a right to sue. But that produced a lot of fear and uncertainty. Now, I will say I was encouraged. In Alabama, the state legislature immediately went into session and they passed a law making clear IVF is protected in Alabama. That was the right thing to do. And even Alabama, which is a bright red, very conservative state, they made very clear we are protecting IVF. In Texas, IVF is protected. I'm confident it will continue to be protected. But I also understand people who are legitimately afraid, and I think that fear is amplified because you see a lot of politicians, a lot of Democrats, who are trying to stir up the fear, who are trying to use this as an election issue to say the big bad Republicans are going to take away IVF. Now, as I said, that's not true. I don't know of a single senator out of all 100, I don't know of one who opposes IVF, but it's why I wanted to lead on this legislation to say, look, let's take the question off the table. Let's put it in federal law. Let's make it an ironclad guarantee. And I think that's the right thing to do for parents in Texas and parents across the country. Well, that's simply not correct. And look, if you look at Congressman Allred's position on abortion, he has a problem, and it's a problem Democrats have across the country, which is Congressman Allred's position on abortion is really radical and extreme. It's outside the mainstream. His position is he supports unlimited abortion on demand, literally up until the moment of birth, partial birth abortion in the 39th week and 40th week of pregnancy. Now, that's an extreme position. If you look nationally, 9% of Americans agree with that. 91% of Americans say, hey, look, that's too far. Even among those Americans who consider themselves pro-choice, a majority of pro-choice Americans say abortion at the very late term, that's too much. And so what you see Congressman Allred and other Democrats doing, because they don't want to defend their extreme position on abortion, instead they attack and they try to suggest that Republicans are going to take away IVF or Republicans are going to take away contraception. And look, I don't know a single Republican in the entire Senate who wants to take away contraception. That is fully protected in law. And IVF, 84% of Americans support IVF, want it protected. This ought to be an issue that produces consensus. And so, listen, when it comes to abortion, abortion is an issue America struggles with. And people have good faith, have genuine disagreements on both sides, and they're heartfelt, they're often emotional, they're often personal. I understand that. I'm pro-life, but I understand people have good faith disagreements with that. And what the Supreme Court has said on abortion is those questions should be decided by the voters. They should be decided by the state legislatures, and each state's laws should reflect the values of the citizens in those states. I think that's the right approach, and what the court said is, listen, If you've got a really contested public policy issue, the answer shouldn't be resolved by 9 unelected judges in Washington, D.C. decreeing a rule for everyone. Instead, we should let democracy work, let the voters decide. And so the Texas legislature decides the law here, just like the legislatures in each of the other 50 states decide the laws there. I do not. I think it's actually both bad policy and blatantly illegal. It's bad policy. It is literally reverse Robin Hood. What Joe Biden and the Democrats are doing is taking from the poor and working class and giving it to richer people. They're taking from truck drivers and steel workers, and they're giving to Harvard graduates. That doesn't make any sense. And by the way, look, I went to Harvard, and you know what? I had about $100,000 in student loans, and you know what I did? I spent years working to pay them off, and I paid them off. That's the right way to do it. And what Joe Biden is trying to do is take money from people who didn't get a college degree or from people who worked to pay off their student loans, take it from them and give it to people who were, gender studies majors at Brown. That's not fair, it's not right, and it's also transparent politics. Listen, what Biden's trying to do is he's trying to buy the votes of young people. And he tried that in 2022. Remember, he did this last time, and he announced he was giving away $1 trillion in loan forgiveness. Now, when he did it, it was obviously illegal. The president doesn't have the ability to give away $1 trillion without Congress appropriating that money. He knew that. His lawyers knew that. But he did it trying to convince young people, hey, vote for Democrats in the November election. Well, the Supreme Court struck it down. They said what was obvious: you don't have the ability to give away $1 trillion. So Biden's doing it again, and I got to say, now it's really cynical, because what the Democrats think is they think young people are not very smart. They think young people will fall for the same con again. It's like Lucy with Charlie Brown in the football. The Biden White House knows this second effort is going to be struck down by the courts as well, but they know that'll happen after Election Day, and so I think they're just trying to buy votes. And I think the President of the United States should follow the law, and Joe Biden's not doing that here. Well, I didn't see Congressman Allred's press conference. I will say I'm glad he's actually doing a press conference. Most of this campaign, he's been hiding in his basement. He's not been doing events. He's not been out. I am more than happy to put my record side by side with Congressman Allred's record. He's been in Congress 8 years now. In that entire time, he's written and passed 3 bills into law. He's done very little. But at the same time, he's voted hard left. His first 4 years in Congress, he voted 100% with Nancy Pelosi. He literally did not deviate on a single issue. He voted repeatedly in favor of open borders. He voted repeatedly in favor of releasing violent criminals from jail. He voted repeatedly against energy and against oil and gas and against jobs. He voted repeatedly for higher taxes and higher regulations. He's voted against Israel. All of those are votes that are out of the mainstream in Texas. And by contrast, my record, I've served in the Senate 12 years. I've authored and passed into law 100 different pieces of legislation. Just 2 weeks ago, President Biden signed into law the FAA reauthorization bill. I wrote that bill. That is major bipartisan legislation. I wrote it hand in hand with Maria Cantwell. Maria Cantwell is a Democrat from Washington State. She's the chairman of the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation. I'm the ranking member, the senior Republican on the Commerce Committee. We wrote it together. That is over $100 billion bill. We spent months working on it to improve aviation safety. By the way, it makes major investments in the DFW area. It makes major investments. It invests billions of dollars in airports across Texas, including DFW and Love. It also puts additional investments into the McKinney Airport to have a third major airport in North Texas. One of the critically important elements that I wrote into that bill is directing the FAA to create an advanced air mobility center to study the future of aviation, study things like helicopters and air taxis and all of the places that air travel is going to go in the decades to come. And the way that is written, I think it is very, very likely that Advanced Air Mobility Center will be right here in Texas at DFW. And I think it should be here, it belongs here. You know, aviation is critically important to Texas. My number one priority is jobs. And there are hundreds of thousands of high-paying jobs that come from aviation. Texas is a massive aviation hub. And I passed that legislation. It passed the Senate 88-4, overwhelming bipartisan support. And so Congressman Allred can give press conferences criticizing, but I am more than happy to put my record of producing real results, fighting for jobs in Texas, against his record voting with the far left against jobs in Texas. Yeah,
Right
yeah.
now.
Yes, yes. Yeah. Yeah, look, when it comes to safety in air travel, it is deeply concerning. We've seen multiple incidences that have been very troubling. That is a major focus of this FAA bill that I wrote that we just passed. This bill invests billions in aviation safety. Now, how does it do that? Number one, it directs the FAA to hire the maximum number of air traffic controllers to fill their capacity. That helps for safety. That also helps for reducing flight delays for the traveling public. And I will say, listen, when you're traveling, the number one priority is safety. When you get on a plane, when you put your family, when you put your kids on a plane, there's nothing you care about more than you want to land safely, you want your family to land safely. And so that's got to be priority number one for the FAA. What this bill also does is it invests in runway technology to detect and avoid collisions. We've seen multiple near misses. I was just yesterday down at Austin Bergstrom Airport, and we saw several months ago, actually last February, a near miss at Austin where a Southwest plane was getting ready to take off, filled with passengers, and a FedEx jet almost landed on top of it. It came within 150 feet of landing on that plane. And thankfully, the heroism of the pilots avoided that collision at the last minute. Well, this bill, the FAA bill, invests in runway technology to detect those incursions and to warn the pilots to prevent that. It also invests in advanced technology in the air traffic control room that's going to be implemented here in DFW, in Love, in airports all across the state of Texas. And I will say, you asked about the Alaska Airlines accident, and that was a very troubling accident. It's something that I and the Commerce Committee have looked at very closely. I went and traveled to the National Traffic Safety Board and looked at the door plug that blew out of that flight, and I will say it is a miracle no one was killed in that accident. Had there been a passenger sitting next to that door plug, that passenger would have been killed, and it was pure happenstance that that seat was vacant. But the NTSB did an investigation, and they discovered that when the door plug was removed for maintenance and it was put back in, that they didn't put the locking pins in place that kept it in place, which is why the door plug blew out. That's deeply concerning, and we invest in this bill in trying to prevent that from happening again. But one of the safety deficiencies that accident revealed is under existing federal law, the black box, the cockpit recorder, only records for 2 hours. Now, I think that makes no sense. And with the Alaska Airlines incident, by the time the plane landed, by the time the technicians made it to the cockpit, more than 2 hours had transpired, and the black box was erased. There was no record whatsoever. And so my reaction, and that of many other members of the committee, was this is crazy. So in this bill, we changed the law so that now the black box recorder records for 25 hours and not 2 hours. So we will have a record of when there is the next incident. We can figure out what the cause is and make sure we do what's necessary to prevent anything that could lead to the loss of life. Well, I've been following it a lot, and I will say you and I were talking right before we knew that the verdict was coming down. What I know about it now is 100% what you have told me, so I have not seen it. I will say, unfortunately, I'm not surprised. I think this is an absolute travesty of justice. I think what we've seen in this New York trial is a mockery. We have a partisan DA who is a rabid leftist who hates Donald Trump. He campaigned promising to get Donald Trump. With George Soros funding, this was a mission to destroy Donald Trump. We had a left-wing judge who did a terrible job, ran a kangaroo circus of a court, ruled against President Trump over and over and over again. This case never would have been brought against anyone else if his name was not Donald J. Trump. If his name was Donald Smith, it would not have been brought. This is not about law. It's not about criminal justice. This is about politics. This is about trying to destroy Donald Trump. And you know, Jack, look, in more than 200 years of our nation's history, we have never before indicted a president or a former president, never once. And in the last year, Democrat prosecutors have done so 4 times. This is something banana republics do. And the real target here is not even just Donald Trump. The real target here is the voters. The Democrats are terrified that in November, the voters are going to vote to re-elect Donald Trump. This is an assault on democracy. And there's an irony. Every Democrat right now is very fond of beating their chest and saying we must defend democracy. And yet what they are doing is abusing the justice system to try to obstruct this election. This decision will be overturned. So I am absolutely confident this decision will be overturned on appeal. As you know, I do a podcast every week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. It's called Verdict with Ted Cruz. My latest podcast does a deep dive on exactly this issues, and in particular the jury instructions. So it's worth, I'm going to try to explain briefly what this case is about, because I got to say, for the average Texan, the average American to try to figure out what this case is about, I'll tell you, very experienced lawyers have a hard time figuring out what this case is about. So the violations, the 34 counts, are all alleged violations of keeping false bookkeeping, putting a false entry in the books, and in particular, identifying a legal payment to Trump's lawyer as legal fees. Now, there are several problems. Number one, under New York law, the false bookkeeping is a misdemeanor, which means it's punishable by less than a year in prison, and the statute of limitations is expired, which means the prosecutor cannot prosecute these claims. Now, there's an exception in New York law if the false bookkeeping is to cover up some other crime. So that was the DA's very creative theory, is the false bookkeeping was covering up some other crime. They claimed that the other crime was any number of things, one of which was a violation of federal campaign finance laws. Now here's the problem. New York DA has no authority to enforce federal campaign finance laws. The Federal Election Commission does have authority to enforce those laws. It looked at these allegations and declined to bring a case. The U.S. Attorney in New York looked at these allegations, declined to bring a case. And what the judge did is gave jury instructions to the jury and said, you don't have to decide what the, quote, other crime is. You don't have to agree what the other crime is. So the U.S. Supreme Court has said, in any criminal conviction, every element of the crime must be unanimously decided upon by the jury. This judge threw that out the window, said the Constitution doesn't apply in New York courts. Each of you 12 jurors can have a different idea of what the, quote, other crime is. You can all have different bases and nonetheless vote to convict. Sadly, that's what they did. I feared this would happen because this jury pool was designed to consist of a very partisan group of Democrats, and it appears that's exactly what they did. But the judge's jury instructions made sure this decision will be overturned on appeal, but here's the problem. In all likelihood, that will happen after the election. We know Joe Biden has scheduled a national press conference where he intends to intone in solemn voices, now the former president is a convicted felon. That was the whole point of this, is to run millions of dollars of campaign ads calling Joe Biden's principal opponent, Donald Trump, a convicted felon. This is politics. This is an abuse of the rule of law. And I got to say, look, let's say you're sitting at home in Dallas and you're a Democrat. Let's say you don't like Donald Trump. You still ought to be troubled by what happened here. You ought to be troubled by seeing the justice system abused to try to destroy one of the two candidates in a presidential election. It ought to be the voters deciding. And I think politically this is going to backfire on the Democrats. I think a lot of Americans, even people who are not fans of President Trump, are very concerned about the justice system being abused like this. Thank you, Jack.
We appreciate it.